Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and this is the Eddie Network podcast. And this is a great conversation. This is my first time meeting Simon van de Els from the Netherlands, and I'm going to give it to you straight from the very beginning when we started, because it was like we had known each other for a long time, and it was just such an easy way into a conversation that we both, I think, felt a great deal of connection and a great deal of depth to the things that we were talking about. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the Eddie Network podcast and hear my conversation with Simon van de Els. Hi, Simon.
Hey, Ed. Good morning for you, most likely.
Yeah, it's 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Perfect time. So that's
midday.
East Coast, probably.
Yeah, East Coast and somewhat midday.
Yeah, nice, nice.
And you're in the Netherlands, right?
Yes, correct.
What
Yeah.
what part?
Well, yeah, the Netherlands is tiny, but it's in the central part of the Netherlands. So really, yeah, yeah, really center, close to some uh, quite some lovely nature, close to the River Rhine, close to it's called the Veluwe, which is a specific region with woodlands.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I'm in a nice place.
I spent a little time there in 2017. Spent a few days in Utrecht and a day in Amsterdam.
Ah, yeah. So I'm closer to Utrecht.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really liked Utrecht. And it was one of those things where I was going to Europe for a month, and I was living in Wyoming at the time, and I was at dinner, I think 2 days, maybe 3 days before I left. And I was having dinner, and I was talking to someone about that I was flying into Amsterdam and going, taking a road trip around the continent. And they said, "Well, why are you going to Amsterdam? You should go to Utrecht. It's better. It's like a small Amsterdam." And so I made this the change in plans, and it was great. I stayed in a hotel right on one of the canals, and
Oh, nice.
went to a really cool hot dog restaurant, and went to a jazz club where they were jamming that night. It was all these local people jamming, and I felt like I was home.
Oh, great. Yeah, that sounds lovely. Yeah.
So, uh, tell me how to pronounce your last name.
Van der Els.
Okay, and are you
Van der Els is also fine. That's a sort of Americanized way of saying it, but
okay? Are you a native of the Netherlands?
yeah, yeah, Dutch. Yeah,
You're Dutch,
yeah.
and so and I and Lauren uh, has connected us together, and I
Hmm.
enjoyed getting to know her and my conversation with her. And I've looked at your LinkedIn page, and there's a lot of connection points. I wonder what I'm hoping to see is how we view these connection points similarly and also differently, because
Oh yeah,
the dynamic of that is really interesting. So before we get into all that, why don't you tell us just a little capsule of who you are and what you do, so that we have a starting point for the audience to say, well, who is this guy that Ed's talking to?
excellent. This is always fun because it's uh, to see if I can get it down really emergent instead of let's say, a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I put it down in a sentence, I think that uh, I am a human figuring out what it means to be human with a capital
Yeah.
in a shifting and changing planet. And I do so from the background of deep study in molecular microbiology. I've succeeded in obtaining a PhD degree in that topic, so genome engineering, horizontal gene transfer, and sort of mastering or at least inhabiting the dominant reductionist materialist framework of our time, the scientific framework, and in some way tipping into a much broader way of perceiving the world, which feels at the same time very old and also very young. And I'm trying to marry the two in my everyday existence, as in how to feel sense in the field, in the world, and at the same time map it, trying to map it and put it down into words that resonate with people from this time, people that come from similar backgrounds, and seeing if I can aid in the process of, let's say, you can use the term awakening. I think I can also use the term being more embedded within a living planet.
Wow.
That.
Um, I would, I could say the same thing about myself, except throw out the PhD in the biology and the genome and all of that biological science stuff, and say I'm on the same trajectory of pursuit. And so I don't know where to start. But let's start here. When you were a younger person, at some point you had an awakening of some sort, or a turning point or a transition point where your perception of things changed. What was it that you were observing then? What is it that you saw that said, "Oh, I see something different and I'm going to go in that direction instead of this direction"?
Mm. It was mainly grief, I think, that triggered it for
Huh.
me. So a latent, but I think always present connection to life. And in this case, for me, it has been mainly animals. Uh, I can also feel strong connections to plant life and other things, but for me, it's animals often. And as a child, I was fascinated, and I had many books and always read about them and everything. So that's, I think, also the reason I started studying biology. But I lost that heartfelt connection at some point in my youth, or I couldn't feel it. And the point of transitioning, I think, was just feeling this massive heartbreak about sort of being in a mass extinction event, an ongoing one, where the human species or the species we are sort of inhabiting plays a big role in it. And the, that overwhelming feeling of grief was just pressing on me, and I had to start feeling again. And I think that sort of shifted everything because I couldn't see it as just, let's say, having a bleeding heart or being sentimental about things. I was like, no, it's actual emotional waves that are connecting everything together and is very real. That the sadness is also felt by the species that are going. And yeah, it's not, in this case, yeah, there it comes. In this case, the anthropomorphizing, which is a major sin, let's say, in modern science. One should not do that. But I felt like, well, if we cannot inhabit the human perspective, that's sort of the only perspective that we can inhabit and feel.
Mhm.
We can inhabit many other perspectives and detach from feeling, but if you feel, then you're human, and human is also an extension of, partially an extension of the living biosphere. And these are our brothers, sisters, our siblings. So yeah, I could not longer see the world as yeah, from a sort of objectified or materialist framework. I could only sense it more as a, well, what probably you would call animistic or pantheistic, or, well, just the sort of spirit that is alive in everything. So I think that was the sort of triggering or tipping point.
On your LinkedIn page, you start your description of who you are, talk about fragmentation. And so you saw you were seeing the world fragmented, I'm guessing.
Mm.
And what does that look like? Because I wrote down 5 words, and I'm curious as to which one of these kind of is preeminent in your mind. But when I see, because I see fragmentation as well, and I see it socially, and I see it organizationally, you know, politically, financially. I see that. But the 5 words that came to me as I read your piece was psychic fragmentation, physical fragmentation, spiritual fragmentation, intellectual fragmentation, and relational fragmentation. So how do you where are you entering into this picture? Because you also are focusing on what is whole. And so I'm guessing if we were to take these 5 fragments and bring them into some kind of holistic picture or reality, that we would be really further along in the world than we could ever imagine.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No, great, great point. Those 5 points that you mentioned, I think, are all parts of the whole. Those are all expressed and expressions, I think, of what you would call whole. And whole doesn't mean for me perfect or finished.
Right.
It means something that is aware of its totality. Let's say it's an awareness that comes from knowing all its parts and not rejecting any of the parts which it encompasses. And at the same time, it acquires new parts, it learns it. And from this perspective, so I'm also doing shamanic practice with clients in this process of aiding people in perceiving their own wholeness in that sense. So, sort of integrating parts that they maybe rejected, and here the physical comes in, and the the psychological, the spiritual, all these points that you mentioned, are relational as well.
Mhm.
And if I think about it, then for me, the main perspectival shift that sort of occurred is seeing things as fields instead of points, or as
Mm.
sort of loose objects. And from a field perspective, I think that me, as I'm sitting here, you as you're sitting there, we are enervated by a field, and you could call that classically a soul. You can, yeah, there's different terms for this, I think, but it's the field, I think, that is primary, and the field is, I think, an expression of consciousness, and consciousness might be the all-pervasive field, I think, that enervates and creates
Mhm.
the universe and is perceiving the universe, or is the universe. And I think that that field is ancient. Each one of those fields,
Mhm.
the fields that are inhabiting us, are ancient and have experience beyond just this life and just this perspective. And so wholeness also becomes a practice of, well, how maybe not how far, but how deep or how wide is your perspective, and what doors do you keep open as to include in that field. as you, so are multiple incarnations real? If you keep that door open, then you might get information of past lifetimes. And I'm saying past, it's most likely like parallel, inhabiting different life forms, not just human. So memories of different places, different ways of being. And well, this physiological, biological marvel that we inhabit goes back to the beginnings of organic life as sort of forming on the planet, and also goes back to inorganic life, all these replicating processes. So it is one big memory bank, a tether or an anchor that connects also to those kind of fields of information. Yeah, and how do they inform us? How do they bring us into form? And what kind of form are we inhabiting? Is it a healthy form or unhealthy? And for some reason, I often use the word, so healing comes from whole, making whole. And wholeness is a state that it's already in, and fragmentation is an imposed state on top of wholeness. It
Hmm.
fragments or introduces breaks or boundaries. And there, I think that any method of tuning into or sinking into these boundary dissolving states where one can see or perceive oneself as more whole, as in integrating parts that once were lost, or information that once was lost, or reading interesting books that shift slightly a paradigm that allow more vistas to open. Yeah, I think that's the journey towards perceiving more whole. And that is, I think, I think you mentioned like a sort of move against fragmentation or a dissolving of boundaries in a good way. Because I think some boundaries, maybe fluid boundaries, are very valuable. Like having a distinct individuals also gives a big spice of life. You don't want everything to be the same. But I think we are, as a culture, we are operating at the moment from a highly fragmented state. And that fragmented state is causing a lot of issues.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Um, I came in, I came to see this when I was a university student, my first semester, and I was 18 years old, and I went to class and I saw what I was going to have to read. I was listening to this professor, and I said, I'm not prepared for this. I'm not prepared to read 500 words out of a single book by a single author and absorb it and master it so that I can do well in this course. But that was the expectation. And I felt that it was a I didn't use that language then, but I felt it was a very fragmented approach to education because I wasn't being asked to learn, I was being asked to replicate.
Yeah.
Um, and 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 as I went through that process, I found a degree program that I could replicate rather. I mean, I could learn by creating rather than simply replicating, and that saved me because I'm not a reductionist thinker at all. I see everything as whole, and I see the fragmentation as both problematic, but I also see it as a natural process of change. So we grow and we get taller. We come out as babies and we get taller and we grow and we develop language. Our language is fragmented, and then our language becomes better. Our emotions change. I mean, all that developmental process is one representation of what being fragmented or not being complete is. We're still a whole person, but we're not complete. But what I find is that people settle for that incompleteness as, okay, this is the norm and this is the way
Yeah.
it's supposed to be. And I don't believe it is. And trying to help people to see a bigger picture is one of the great challenges we have. And I think these five areas of psychic, physical, spiritual, intellectual, and relational are fields that we're plowing and cultivating for people to discover something more about their lives than they have ever imagined there being the possibility for. But once they begin to discover that, they see that the avenues for their life to expand into richness and impact and all of that just grows very quickly.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. It also makes me think about indeed education and how you just mentioned that it's much of education is schooling, and I think I mastered the art of schooling at a young age, but then you're really just presenting the answers that you know are being asked. And for me, that was not actual learning because then you have the classic like, okay, you study for a test and you study for a week, you do the test, you pass, and then you forget everything.
Right.
Kind of that way, because if you're not being invited to ask questions, and ask questions is a sort of doorway to curiosity or personal skin in the game of what you really want to learn. And otherwise, the things just feel like a lot of distraction, even though it's often well meant. And I would say oftentimes it's not well meant, but that's a more systemic, I think,
Mhm.
issue. Yeah, this is something that also keeps me busy, or something that I think about is like what does education, what would proper education be like for new humans, or maybe old humans as well, humans coming up in this time and age, knowing that the systems we are operating within, these systems of high complexity, are reaching some form of end point, or at least a point of creaking and deterioration. And what are we then preparing people for? What kind of reality? While it would be, I think, much better, but there are many people thinking about this and applying this. But yeah, how to bring in a more whole perspective of what the human is and all the facets of human existence instead of just focusing on a narrow
Well,
part.
it seems to me that we are reaching a point where, and I'm a little hesitant to say this, but we're finally reaching a point where we're asking the systems of the world to actually prove that they're producing what they have promised they would produce. And I'm thinking about that in education. Where I live, in the town I live in, we're in the middle of a situation where there's something like a $50 million shortfall in the funding of the public schools in our county. And as a result, they have let over 300 employees go. And some of these are teachers and some of them are administrators. And so the question is, well, what is education, the educational product look like going forward? And I've talked to some of these teachers, and they're very distressed over what's going on because they don't know where they stand, and they feel very much like pawns on a chessboard.
Oh, yeah.
The weakest link, where they really are the most critical link to the educational process. So I see it in those practical terms of, well, we're fragmented there, but what does it mean for an education system to be whole? And what shall a child, maybe at certain stages along the way, and I'm thinking, I've been thinking about this a long time. I have children probably your age. I have three children in their 30s, and I realized when the oldest was about 12 that I needed to begin to treat them as adults. So the youngest was 5 at that point. And by treating them as adults, it meant that I would not answer questions. Instead, I would ask them questions to help them come to their own answers. And I mean, if it was like, okay, or what time are we going, to the school or whatever, whatever. But that's a different thing. But when they ask the larger question, well, let's figure this out. Let's look at this together. Let's and it what it led me to was to think, maybe we should start teaching children entrepreneurship when they're in third or fourth grade. Let them practice creating something that they can say, this is mine and this is something I'm giving to the world. And if it fails, okay, it fails. We're going to learn how to fail and we're going to learn how to overcome failure.
Mm.
By the time they're an eighth or ninth grader, they will have become practiced in taking initiative and creating things, and they're no longer simply responding to instructions. And and that maybe they don't need education after the age of 15, or maybe they go to college. Maybe colleges move to a younger stage where they're you know and I think what that means in the context of our conversation is we're looking at the whole person. And the whole person, what does the whole person mean for the entire length of their life? Do we spend a quarter of it learning, preparing to act, or should we spend 10% of it preparing to act, and the 90% acting and learning and growing and moving into different iterations of what my life could be?
Yeah, I like that. Makes me think about my experience with the educational system. I once, uh, a dear friend of mine once told me, like, Simon, for someone who hates school so much, you sure are an idiot to spend so much time in school, because I also pursued a PhD degree. And what I've noticed also in academia and also in university is the most I've learned from internships and thesis. And so I was training to be a scientist who works in a lab. And then you have to learn, you apprentice. You're becoming an apprentice with a PhD student, and you have a supervisor who is a professor above that. And you have a meeting every now and then with the professor, but the PhD student is sort of your daily talking point. And they are teaching you the trade. And part of the trade is curiosity and, yeah, learning to navigate unforeseen things. Because the moment you start working in a lab and you design experiments, on average, 9 out of 10 experiments fail, as in fail to show or present what you wanted to present, and they fail for different reasons: bad design, or just things going wrong, or you're using the wrong reagents, or the bacteria don't want to grow, or it can be a lot of different things. And continuously, it is becoming aware of why did it fail, and then seeing, well, how do I design this better? Back to the drawing board. How can I rule out all the options? And especially with molecular biology, you're working only with invisible things. So you have all these different unique methods of checking in between, like, am I actually producing what I want to produce? Am I making this chain of DNA that I want to introduce here, and is it correct? And I have to sequence. But most of the things I've learned were in this sort of apprentice master relationship. And I think that was the truth, or at least a method of learning for most of human civilization. I think centralized schooling is mainly a product of the industrial age. And it has its benefits, and I think it was necessary for the time also to mobilize, let's say. But it, of course, has a shadow side. There's a big shadow connected to this sort of more one size fits all propagandized type of schooling. And I think we're reaching this sort of end of this. There's this book on the collapse of complex societies or complex civilizations. I I can't think of the exact title, but there's often talk about an overproduction of elites. So an overproduction of
Are you thinking of Joseph Tainter?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the overproduction of elites, it was something that struck me quite a bit because I often, and this might be personal flaw as well. This is something that I work on or think about. I often had difficulty celebrating achievements because it often felt like, well, I was there doing it and now we're on to the next thing. And so I had difficulty celebrating getting my bachelor degree or getting my master's degree, even my PhD. And there was this sense of how to say, the romanticized image of the scientist mystic that I think I always loved and yearned for, and the more artistic expressions of the
Yeah.
sort of playful, that the lab is more of an art studio in a sense. That was more my sense of doing things. But a lot of the academia and modern science is more of a trade, is more of a bricklaying in a sense. And the sheer output of methods and things, you can always find the exact method that you need to work. So the artistry disappears somewhat. And there I can get a sense of maybe it's a romanticized image, but I talked to this with some of my former colleagues and friends. I sometimes feel like the the types of scientists who were very groundbreaking in the previous century, early previous century, they probably wouldn't do well in the current academic environment. I think that the incentive structures there are actively undermining
Hmm.
the forms of sort of really creative and groundbreaking work. It's sort of impeded. It's not supported in this system, and yeah, I find that a big pity. But I'm also again curious because it's of course a driver as well because it will frustrate people, and then frustrated people will try to do things differently, and then maybe we'll see birthing of novel types of guilds or institutions.
I've had quite a few guests express the very same thing, and in which tells me a couple of things. One is that there is a remnant of memory of what it was before we got into this moment in time, and that remnant, I my term is actually generational memory. That previous generation, that memory of the previous generation, actually inspires and guides us into the future. And it's not what we're doing in the present, which is really inspiring us for the future. It's just so the representation of change as sort of a degradation and of ending of something so that something new can emerge from that. That's kind of the way I see what you're describing. And, let's get on with it, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of what I feel as well. I just today I had to think again about the Tower of Babel as a
Yeah.
great allegory for the sort of systemic or the moment we find ourselves in. And we're creating golems, let's say, that do automatically keep on building the tower, like artificial intelligence, generative AI, and the internet is being sort of overpopulated with these kind of entities and in interactions and information. And the replication crisis within most of the sciences was already quite bad, let's say 10 years back. I'm thinking that it only becomes worse and worse as these forms of automation and this sheer output is increasing because of these incentive structures. And so there's a silver lining again, because for anyone who steps back and who is, let's say, on whatever level of the tower they are at, they're taking a moment of rest maybe smoking a cigarette, sitting on the edges, and are looking upwards, like, where's this thing going? And do I actually want to stay here? And maybe they're looking out into the hills and seeing some hints of some small campfires, or maybe some small little villages or different things that are being built. And
Yeah.
well, they start making the trek out. And this is something that heartens me, and something that I think a sort of nomad in that sense. I kind of know the tower. I don't really want to engage with the tower that much. While at the same time, the center of gravity for most of our economical and financial systems is still sort of centered within the weight, or like the event horizon of this thing. And at the same time, there are many people building outside of the city, I think.
I agree with that. And that's what I've seen throughout my whole career. And that's what's interesting is that um, from my perspective, we have very self-contained structures of organizations, and they're very resistant to change. And they're like the old um, fortresses of the Middle Ages. I'm kind of thinking of Monty Python and the Holy Grail as King Arthur and his
Yeah.
his little group comes up to the French fort, and the French think that they're nothing, and it's such a hilarious thing, and but they think that they're safe within the walls, and that they have power because they're within the walls. But what the reality is that they're in a prison. They're imprisoned within those walls, and the real people are out wandering the hills of England or Europe or America or wherever it may be. And that freedom that exists, which I think is freedom is. It's an interesting question because one of the philosophic touch points right now is talking about freedom of the will. I think it's fascinating. So I'm rambling. I apologize. But
No problem.
where I'm going with this is that um, there's a lot of freedom if you choose to go um, look for it and embrace it. And you don't have to go out and start another Microsoft or a Apple or a Google. You don't have to go start something like that. You can just go start something small that is an expression of your own um, observations of the world, and you're changing the world because you see something. You see the fragmentation. He said, I can change that. And you use the terminology of healing, and I want to talk about that. But that's what I see. I see that the actions of people are leading us into a different world, and the things that we've gone through over the last 50 years, 70 years, during the course of my lifetime, have increasingly there's a small percentage of people that's growing to recognize what you're talking about and what we're talking about today. And,
Mm.
and for that reason, I'm excited about what the future holds. And so so
Yeah, me too.
so let's talk about. I mean, healing is an important word to you. So let's talk about what healing looks like from where most of us are sitting today, watching this, the experience of life that we're having, experience in organizations, experience of work with family and things like that. What is it that where does it mean for us to seek and to find healing for our lives and our world? Hope that
I
makes
think,
sense.
yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. I'm just just feeling into the question also to see what kind of words make sense. Um, Here it helps to have a perspective which isn't materialist,
Hmm.
because the materialist perspective sort of assumes that, for instance, consciousness, mind is emergent from matter. So we are a body first, and conscious experience comes out of it. That's a very ideological claim, and it's a philosophical stance, which isn't often questioned. And for those who are active within spiritual traditions, or let's say older religious traditions, there's more talk of like field awareness. So if we take a brief moment to entertain the perspective of field or consciousness being primary and matter, the body being an expression of that field,
Hmm.
then healing becomes a process of awareness and embodiment. And embodiment in this perspective, I really mean awareness of the body, awareness and inhabiting the body, and everything that is anchored to the body. The body is like a receiver, I feel. And the more we are consciously present in our body, the better we are capable of tuning, let's say, into certain signals. And one of the signals of our body is our field, our soul. And so the process of wholing, to me, healing, is to start inhabiting the body fully and becoming aware of the places where we aren't inhabiting the body. So often when I work with clients on this process, I use the body, especially because mine is quite sensitive in mirroring others and sensing into their body. And we seek those places where a sense of lack is being felt. So the places where we don't inhabit the body. So for instance, some muscles we might not even we cannot even put our awareness into. It doesn't mean that they're not there, and it doesn't mean that they're not working. But things get stored up. Any place in the body we don't inhabit will hold on to ancestral things, will hold on to environmental inputs, triggers, things that live within us. And the more awareness we bring into the body, and that awareness can be phenomenologically, can be like just noticing the pulsations of the heart and the blood flow. It can be the feeling the like the neurons firing. It can be very visceral sensations, but it can also be very energetic. So very much like, oh, if I'm present in my heart, I can feel this expansion. I can feel this open, calm presence. Or if I'm present in my lower stomach and I sink into it, I become more grounded. And in that grounded sense, I feel sturdy. I feel more capable of moving in and out of the world. So for me, the process of healing in this case is identifying those places, and I use the body as a map for this because it's the thing that anchors us in this shared communal reality in this sort of this realm.
Yeah.
Is the more we become embodied, the stronger we can hold our own signal, and the more often we experience the pure joy of our own expression and presence, like flow states. For instance, if you watch really good musicians or artists who are on the stage and they have their own produced music and they manage to tap into whatever exactly their thing is, there's this expansion, there's this sheer joy, abundance that spreads from that. And I think that type of artistry can be done at any walk, every walks of life, and anything. But it's really down to this sort of awareness in inhabiting oneself.
What is it like for you to be in that flow state?
Oh, I start talking without knowing what I'm saying. I feel a slight joy at the back of my mind. There's part of me that observes but doesn't intervene. And that part is often very joyous. It's like, ah, yes, this is great. Heart rate elevates. I get like warm feelings, energy. So, for instance, a conversation like this also induces a flow state because I'm just going with what comes up, which words. But I can also have it with dance, for instance, and then just being fully immersed in that moment.
You're being your complete self in the moment that you're in flow. And I see that. I think our conversation is one of those flow states because I think we share enough things in common that we understand one another, and that opens that for a flow state within a communal sense, a relational sense.
Yes,
And to me, that's one of the things we're seeking is to try to figure out, well, how does all of this work in my relationships with people? Because so much of the world is oriented towards individualistic and compliance with the structure. You know, those are
yes,
the two kind of movements that we're confronted with in the modern world. When in reality, what we want is to be my full self in relationship with other people who are in their flow in their flow state is at the same time.
yes, yeah. And then there's this mutual. It can't help but getting this mutual recognition, and the lights are on behind the eyes, let's say, and that creates emergent relationship and mutualistic behaviors, and that just goes past etiquette and past rules and past
Yes.
pomp and sort of yeah ancient
So
codes of conduct.
there's no list there that we're trying to go through. Oh, we got to get through this list. You know, we're flying. We're up there and we're just enjoying the world as it confronts us in front of us. And that's
Yeah,
what
yeah, yeah. And so, if anything, I think healing or holding is the process of becoming more aware of those parts that live within us and that want to express themselves.
hmm
There's so much, and this is for me, of course, I stepped into this process. Had to. I felt like I was in a deep burnout, existential depression, and I just had to. I couldn't do anything else. And in that process, which I'm still in, I start recognizing, inviting, and celebrating parts of me that I've repressed for, I don't know, for different lengths of being.
yeah.
But as they are invited back in, you can think about these sort of IFS, internal family systems, kind of theories. As they are invited back into the family, like with any ecological situation, if you invite the wolves back into Yellowstone Park or is it Yosemite, it changes the rivers, right?
Yeah.
So if we invite these exiles, these parts of us which are actually the spice of life, if you invite them back, it's not just them strengthening or alivening you, they also change all the other parts of you. So the whole family structure starts to shift. And yeah, there's great joy in that because that cannot be planned. And it's yeah.
I was in Yellowstone this summer. It's my favorite place in the whole world, and I used to live out there. And and so I was up there one day, and was I had encountered a group of deer just eating, and were moving through the brush and stuff like that. And then I came across some good people standing on the side of the road, so I pulled off and they pointed up at the ridge line, and there was a grizzly up there on the ridge line, and this grizzly was just digging for food and stuff like that. And I have this on camera. I have this on video, and all of a sudden the grizzly stands up, and he's looking down the ridge line, and he turns and starts running. And what follows him is a wolf.
Whoa.
And and I've seen wolves in other parts of Yellowstone, and they're chasing elk or they're chasing deer as a pack, and but it really is it's a fascinating thing to see that ecosystem actually function as it's intended. And yeah, it's it's a place of wholeness, and I feel whole when I'm there. And the last thing to say about that is here I am in this gorgeous natural setting, and what I feel is my smallness and my vulnerability, and that seems to be the right mindset to have in respect to the whole world. That I am not in charge here. I don't have control over the wolves or the grizzlies or anything that goes on there. I am only in control of myself, but I'm in relationship with all this and I respect it. And because I respect it and actually love it, it feeds me and it gives me a sense of wholeness that I don't find in any other place.
Mm.
And I think this is what you're talking about.
Mm. Yeah, it's being situated, it's being contextualized within a larger living whole. And I think that is the move that is happening for the collective human, especially the human alive right now that is conditioned and grown in the tradition of abstraction that is coming from the West, which was a necessary, I think, evolutionary development of the planet. If we see the human as an expression of the planet and an organ within the planet, there was this necessary, I think, move that Gaia needed to make in order to gain this level of abstraction where she could not only see herself in uh, sort of different temporal scale, so abstract herself from the current moment, but also to have available hands to sculpt and adapt. And I think with the human, she potentially has a organ which is highly capable of shaping her body, shaping the contours and the ecosystems that she is, potentially into, let's say, more intergalactic or larger scales, cosmic scales. But we're having to figure it out as we go along, and the level of abstraction has gone so far that we lost our perspective of what we are contextualized in, which
Yeah.
is a living body.
Yeah.
It's like often cancer is used as an analogy. The problem with that is it's a very morally charged. But if you look at the just the biological characteristics of cancer, it typically is a cell or a set of cells that loses its perception of the whole. So for a cancerous cell, its environment is environment.
Yeah.
And even the word environment doesn't make any sense, right? Because
Right.
we are on a living planet with a thin layer of atmosphere, and everything within it is like a body. It's not separated from us. But the moment we see it as an outside, then it's fine to also utilize and to eat, to feed on in a non cyclical or recipro I cannot say the word
No,
reciprocal manner.
reciprocity is, I think, the word you're using.
Yeah, yeah, and
Reciprocity. Yeah.
yeah, and then experiences like you just described, those are for me in the places of nature that I can visit nearby, or I was recently in the south of France. There you become situated and the boundaries dissolve a little bit, and then you start feeling a part of a whole again, part of a larger organism, part of a larger body. And the comfort of knowing that you're part of that, that just brings so much stability and a sense of belonging. And from that sense of belonging, we don't need to seek that much anymore. We don't need to be out and about looking for where do I belong? I need to acquire this, I need to survive. But then, yeah, it feeds us once more. And I think a lot of people are looking for exactly this.
Yes.
And we're becoming also aware that ideologies in the previous century attempted this and were capable of doing this. But again, it was a limited sense of belonging because it only had people belong to a nationality or to a caste or a class, and then still had this out group. And I hope this is the image that I hold for humanity, but just the collective human and the planet, is that whatever we are called to form, which as individuals, which organs we are called into being, or we are called into to form. So maybe you're being called to form part of the eye. Maybe I'm called to be part of a neuron or like a skin, but that we honor that and we become aware that the human is not a unicellular organism. It's not like one undefined blob,
Right.
and it's not all the same. And it is situated within this planetary organism.
So would it be? Two words come to mind as you describe all that. One is that we live in an organism, and that our place in the organism is relational to every other part of the organism. That
Yes.
there's a relation. I find the word relationship helpful because it says I am a distinct individual or a distinct entity, but I'm going to be in relationship with other distinct entities, and those relationships change us or magnify the best of us or reveal the worst of us. But whatever it is, that relationship is essential to the life that we have.
Yes, I fully agree with that. And there's this in developmental biology. So stem cells often take their definitive form or shape or diversify into whatever cell they need to become is based often on context. So what are the cells right next to me will inform what kind of cell I will become. And so, context and situating oneself in relationships that nourish and that mirror something, the best of us, back to us,
Yeah.
will help us diversify into whatever state or whatever function we're coming here to do.
So let me ask you one more question as we kind of come to the end of our hour. Um, let's say people are watching this and they're intrigued by this conversation and they're hearing something that resonates with them, but they've never heard it before. So what is your advice to them? What should they go do next? If something here has interested them, but they don't know what to do with it.
Okay, the words that are coming up: sit by a river,
Okay.
sit by a river. And sort of the questions that are coming up and that they want to learn about is sort of toss them into the river like stones or little twigs that float, and sense what comes back, sort of what starts speaking. And if that is a um, request for more, let's say, human language, human information, well, then of course get in contact, and I might share some of the books that I enjoy or the talks that I like. Um, but it's follow the curiosity that the places where you're where this sort of aliveness occurs, where there's a little bit of a, ooh, I didn't know this, or ooh, this is touching something within me. Those are little doorways, I think. And then it's like, yeah, follow those,
Just
keep
follow it.
walking those. Yeah. Wander.
Um, I would. I would only add spend less time worrying about what other people are saying on social media.
Yeah,
And
that's great advice as well.
and, and if you don't know what that means, turn off your phone, turn off your computer, go sit in a chair, have no sound, no music, nothing, and close your eyes. And more than likely, you will fall asleep. And it's because you're tired and you're exhausted from all the stimulus that you've been receiving. And what you need to do is get to a point of um, of rest. So, which is what I think is what you're saying. So, and I do that frequently. Um, I'm grateful for you and what you're doing. I wish you well. I hope that your reach grows and that people find you and that you help them find the healing that they need, whatever that means to them. But and I just wish you well because I love I love the things that you're saying because they're so um, run so counter to the kind of the memes that we get, throughout society. And
Mm.
but I think they're they're points they point in a direction which it can be really helpful to us.
No, thank you, Ed. I want to thank you for hosting me and just stepping into the conversation as you did, because I think these kind of conversations can only be held with a sort of mutual trust and curiosity. And I found this very fun, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, thank you. And I thank you all for watching, and I hope this is gained something from us. Leave a comment, and obviously, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast.